Hello everyone, this is Christian Mud, Exiton Interactive, and in this video we are going to try to prevent the first type of attack against our application, and that specifically is the cross-site request forgery attack. Main reason we're doing this now is because we've, in the previous episode, implemented the ability for our application to communicate with the server, so now is as good a time as any to try and take care of this problem. And I'm not a security expert, so you've seen in previous episodes I like to create or roll my own solution, or wrap someone else's solution in mind to make it perform the way that I want, have the functionality I want. This is not the way we're going to approach security. We're basically going to use the out-of-box methods that are provided by, in this case, Microsoft. So we're not going to be monkeying with it at all. But just so that we're aware of, I guess, briefly what the attack is that basically it requires a user to be logged in to our application. And I guess applications that use cookie authentication are most vulnerable to it. So the user has a valid authentication cookie. They visit a malicious site. That site performs a request back to our application, and because the user is logged in, the browser is going to automatically include their authentication cookie with the request. As far as our application is concerned, we see a user who is authenticated performing a request, so we don't have a problem with them doing it. So the solution to this problem is going to be that we're going to need to include additional information with the request, and for this is going to be we're going to include a token in the header of our request. So we're making AJAX requests, asynchronous JavaScript requests. So we're going to include we're going to include a custom header in the request. The server then is going to look for that header. It's going to look that it exists and that it has the correct value for the user. And the way that they somehow generate these tokens is supposed to be very hard or impossible for someone to guess what the value should be. And then the attacker, the malicious website, will not have access to that token, so they won't know what value to provide with the request. So that's in a nutshell. As usual, there's a link to the article in the description below, and then inside the article a link to the sort of small article here from Microsoft talking about it. Of course, you can search like Wikipedia for cross-site request forgery, and there's a whole article on it. Like I said, I'm not a professional security person, so we're just going to go with basically what they tell us to do. I'm going to close that. We'll refresh our browser here. And so we have our application running. Just to be sure, let's just go in here. Our request is going. We have a 200 response, and of course we saw the output from the server, so everything's still working. Let me go back in here and bring up the notes for everything, and we're going to begin. So like I said, basically our starting point is that we need to have a token so that we can send in with our request, and we're going to want to have the token available on basically each page so that we can use it when we need. Of course, we have a simple solution for that, and that's to modify. So if we go into the pages, inside the pages folder there's a layout.cshtml file. So we're going to modify this to include a token. So what we're going to do, I like to put it in, just after the opening body tag. So I'm going to say add HTML. So we're using the HTML helper. And inside of here, there's a method called anti-forgery token. We're going to save that. So that's all that we need in order to include the token in our page. Before we check for it, though, I'm going to make a change to the controller that we created. So I'm going to the controllers folder and go to the account controller.cs file. So inside of here, what we need is to tell our controller that, or this action, the check username availability action, we need to tell it that it should look for the anti-forgery token. If it doesn't find it, or it's invalid or incorrect, it should disallow the request. And the way that we do that is by adding an attribute to the action. And that attribute is called validate anti-forgery token. Okay, so we have this attribute now, and so our request will, or the server will look for this token in the request. Let me save this. And since we've changed the server file, I'm going to hit F6 to rebuild the project, rebuild the solution. I'm going to go back to the browser. Since we've done that, we need to refresh it. So we'll give our browser a moment to reconnect everything. And now the application is back up and running again. If I go to the Network tab, I'll focus the username input and remove focus. And where we had previously a 200 response from the server, we're now getting a 400 bad request response. And it's also obviously very good that it doesn't actually tell us what the error is. We don't actually have a response from it, just telling us it was a bad request. So let's go back to Visual Studio. So what we need is to be able to include that token in our request. I'm going to close the files we have open. And we're going to want to include the token basically in every request. So what we're going to do is go down to our source and services folder. Inside of that, we'll go into the HTTP service. Okay, actually I lied. We first need to have access to it. So first we're going to go into the DOM reader service so that we can easily find that token and get the value. Although the first thing that I'm going to do here is this check. So in the previously we implemented the find child method. Inside of the find child method is this check on whether the child, whether we were able to find a child. If we're allowed null, we're just going to return null. Otherwise, we return this error. We're going to do this several times, and well, at least one more time because I'm about to do it. So we're going to create sort of a little helper method to take care of doing that for us over and over again. So I'm going to come down here and create a private method. And I'm going to call that check for nil. And I'm going to want to have passed into me query selector, which is a string. We're going to have the element passed in, which is an HTML element. And we'll say allow nil. And that's a Boolean. And I haven't updated the article apparently, so let's look on the actual code. So we have the allow nil, and the last thing that we're going to provide here is a parent, which is an HTML element. We're going to default to null, and we'll see why here in just a little bit. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to say is that if allow nil, so if we don't care whether it's undefined or null, or I'm going to put a couple parentheses here, or type of and element, we'll say not equal to undefined, and element not equal to null with one too many equal signs. If any of those are true, then we'll say return. So if it's undefined or null and this thing is allow nil, we don't care. Otherwise, if it's not undefined and it's not null, then it's good to go and we'll just return. Next, what we'll say is that if, and we'll go parent not equal to equal null, then we'll do our console log of the parent. Perfect. Otherwise, we'll say const container, and this is equal to, if the parent is equal to null, then what we were looking for basically was contained within the document. Otherwise, it was contained within the parent. And we're going to say throw new error, whoops, backticks, and we'll say container does not contain an element with, can't spell, with query selector, and we'll put our query selector over here. Container. So now instead of having this, we will just say, so in the find child method, we'll say this dot check for nil, and inside of that we'll tell it, I guess we want the query selector first. Next we want the child, so the element that we were looking for, allow nil, and in this case we do have a parent to send in. Okay, so that will do the same thing. Oh, one thing to change. So it was an HTML element. What I was doing was casting the child as T in the return statement. What we'll do is we'll replace that. We'll move up here and say child as T once we found it. Okay, so now that we've changed or added that, we will add in what we need. Nope. Go back to the notes again. And what we need is a generic find method. So we have find child by, well, we have find child. We just need to find child generically. And let me just move this down here for the OCD to kick in. Okay, so what we want is a find method. So public find, same deal, T extends HTML element. Just go ahead and close that for the moment. So what we want is to, I guess I could say find by query selector, but we're not. We're going to say find. We'll say query selector. So this will be a string again. Allow nil, boolean, defaults to false. All right, so in here, all we have to do then is to say const element is equal to document dot query selector, pass in the query selector, cast it as T, send this in to the this check for nil. Send in the query selector, the element, and allow nil. Of course, no parent, because we're checking the document for it. And then we'll say return element. So we have an easy way of finding an element. This will not be the only time that we'll actually want the value from an input. So we're just going to make it that much simpler for us. And we'll say public and get value by query selector. And I guess we'll tell it that it is a string that we'll be returning here. And what we'll do up here is to say what we want is the query selector. Query selector. Again, a string. Our friend allow nil, boolean, defaults to false. So what we'll do is we'll say const input is equal to this dot find. What we're finding in this case is an HTML input element. We want to find it using the query selector, and we'll pass in the allow nil. Probably will never happen, but it's possible that allow nil is true. So if it's true, then that means input is possibly undefined. So we'll say if type of input equals undefined, or input, just because ReSharper will complain at me as usual, is equal to null, we'll just return null. Otherwise, we want to return input.value. So that will give us an easy way to get the value of an input. So I think we can test that now. Let me go back to our components TypeScript file. So the authenticator.component.ts file. We'll go into the constructor. Perfect. And let's just put it on the bottom here. What we'll say is console log this dot DOM reader dot get value by query selector, so that I don't mistype this thing here. Again, if we look in our browser, the element, what's happened here is the input is put in here and we get this name. So the name is what we're going to search for. So that's what we're doing here. Name is equal to this double underscore request verification token. Put my semicolon, save it, everything green. Go back to my browser, go to the console, and here I see that the token is being displayed, or the value or the token is being displayed in the console. So we're able to get that value. I'm going to delete the console log, save it. So now we have access to a token. Let me close these files and we'll go into the services folder again. We'll start off with our base HTTP service. So we have access to the token. Now we have to include it with our request. So the first thing that we're going to do is import a couple more things from the Angular's HTTP package. And the first thing that we need is headers. And next one we need request options. Of course, we're going to import our DOM reader service from DOM reader.service. DOM reader service, perfect. So what we're going to do basically is to create the request option. Request options holds a reference to the headers. So I'm going to create a private read-only field, and that's going to underscore request options. So type request options, set it to null to begin with. So in the constructor, we're going to need to have the DOM, an instance of the DOM reader service. So we'll say protected read-only and DOM reader, which is of type DOM reader service. And we're going to use that now to create our request options. So this dot underscore request options is equal to new request options. That takes an object in the constructor, and the object has a property called headers. Get out the way. The headers will say new headers. Again, it takes an object, and what we're going to do, unrelated to our discussion of this cross-site request forgery, is to set the content type of our request application/JSON. So we want JSON. And now we're going to set the header for our token, and we're going to name the header x-xsrf-token, all uppercase. And again, we'll use the DOM reader to find this. And again, it's the get value by query selector, which we saw earlier in the console log statement. So we'll just copy that in. So now, wondering where my squiggly is coming from. Now we have the value of this input, our token input. It's being assigned to this header. So we have the headers. We need to include them in our request. And it's a simple matter of going down to our get method. Inside here we have the this.http.get request where we're passing in the URL. We simply need to also pass in this.request options. Okay, we'll save that. We'll have an error at the moment, right? Because we need to pass in the DOM reader service from our authenticator HTTP service. So I'm going to go back in here. And again, we need to import the DOM reader service and underscore DOM reader dot service. And made a mistake somewhere in there. Oh, that's because it's inside the services folder. Now we should have it. Perfect. As usual, I'm going to rely on Angular to inject it. So I'm going to go down to the constructor here. And I'm going to say DOM reader. And that's an instance of DOM reader service. And then I'm going to pass that in to the call to super. Give my squigglies a chance to go away. Save that. Everything's building correctly. Return to the browser. Everything's good to go there. What I'll do here is just, we'll go into our network tab. We'll make a request. So I focus and then remove focus. So we can see that in our request, we do in fact have the token being included with the request headers. So there's the name of it and the token value. So it is being sent in. And of course, we still see that we are receiving a 400 bad request. And we're going to fix that now. Go back to Visual Studio. I'll close these files. Reason that we're receiving that request is that the application does not know where to look for that token. And so to fix that, we're going to go into the startup.cs class. So the file is in the root of our project. And we're going to go down to this configure services method. And we'll say services dot, I think it's something to do with add anti-forgery. And here we'll say that the header name is equal to, and what we called it, all capitals, CSRF dash token. Nope, not, we're assigning it, not checking it. So we are assigning the header name to the same header name that we put in our TypeScript files. We'll save that, refresh it once again. Go ahead and close it. We'll go back to our browser, and since we've rebuilt our project, we're going to refresh the browser. Give it a second to do its magic. And now we'll go in. I'm going to focus the username, remove focus, and we're back to having a 200 response for our request. So again, we're including the token with the request, and the server's finding it, saying that it's a valid token and that we're good to go. And so since we have only a few minutes here in this video, what I'm going to do here at the end is to now modify our request so that it's actually sending in what the user is, or the username that the user is checking to see if it's available. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do is go into our base HTTP service again. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is import from our good friend Lodash the forown method, the function that we've used previously. And what I need now, so to get the gist, what I'm going to do is to take in the get method, we're going to modify, so we have the URL coming in. Next I'm going to say that I also want data, which is an object. We'll deal with the case if we ever get to the point where we have a get request that doesn't have, we might just pass in an empty object if we don't have any data to send in. But I want to create a helper method. Basically, I'm going to need to take this data object and convert it to a query string for the get request. So we're going to create a little helper method down here, and we're going to call it, let's make it down here, private query string. It's going to take in data, again, object. Scroll down here a bit. And what we'll do is we'll say, so if type of data equals undefined or data equals null, what we're going to do is just return an empty string. Next, we're going to create a constant string array. So string array is equal to, and what we're going to do now is to go through the properties of our data object and convert those to the appropriate string. And of course, we'll use the low-for-own method to do that. We're going to look at the data object. What we're going to send into our function here is a value, which could be any, I guess should in principle be, I mean, could be a number or string, and then a key, and the key should be string. Although we can just say any, doesn't matter. And let's take care of that. What we're going to do then is to say string.push, and what we're going to push onto here is a string, obviously. We're going to interpolate by saying, so encode URI component. So we'll use this function to encode the key first, right? And then we need to have an equal sign, and then we will encode the value. So now we have a string array which contains all of our key value pairs. Of course, what we'll do now is we'll say return string array join, and we're going to join, of course, by the ampersand. You can ignore this little red squiggly. I didn't want to take care of it before yet because you have to restart Visual Studio to take care of it. It's a ReSharper's complaining at me. And so we have a query string. I also want to have a method that will easily take a URL and an object and convert it to a URL with query string. So we'll say private URL with, URL with query string. And we're going to take in a URL and the data, and then I'm going to say let query string equal this query string data. We'll say if query string, if the query string is not equal to the empty string, and we'll say, almost getting ready to sneeze there. What we'll say is that it's the same query string, except that we'll prepend the question mark at the beginning. So we'll interpolate on the query string. And now we will return backticks for our string interpolation. Put our $URL and curly brackets query string. Okay. So now a little bit of infrastructure we have there. We can go back to our get method. So instead of just passing in the URL, what we're going to say is this dot URL with query string, pass in the URL and the data. All right, save that. Again, we'll see we have a little error going on because we need to return to our authenticator HTTP service and give it the data. In this case, we're already getting the username passed in to our method. So all we have to do is create an object here. We're going to give it a property name of username, set its value equal to the username that's being passed in. Now we'll save, go back, everything's green again. In order to see, well, we can see now if we want that. So let me close that request and we'll go back in, type some stuff in, remove focus, and we'll see that the user or the request is in fact including the username in the query string. Go back to the browser here, but we need to modify our controller so that it will do something with that. So we'll go to the controllers folder and to the account controller file that we created last time. We're going to go to our check username method, and we're going to add an argument here, so string username. It's important that the string has the same value as the parameter in the query string so that the model binder can find it. So now that we've said username, like I said, the model binder will bind the query string parameter to this. And in the future here, we are going to need to have the ability to generate an error response from the server, basically saying that the username is not available. So what I'm going to do is just say, so if username, if that's equal to, and we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 A's, we're going to generate the error. So we'll return bad request. For the moment, we're just going to say, return the same thing that we were returning before, an anonymous object with a property message, and we're just going to set the message equal to the username. Otherwise, if it's not 8 A's, we're just going to return, again, okay, same anonymous object. Let's just steal it from here. Probably could have typed it faster than copying and pasting, but so now we have the ability to generate a bad request and an OK request. I'm going to save, hit F6 to rebuild the project, return to the browser and refresh. I think we can close these things. And then let's see, let's go back to the browser. It's trying to buy some time. Okay, so now it's there. Let's again type in some gibberish, and we see that it's included in the URL and the query string. So we go back to the console, we can see that the message also includes it. So we know that the query string, the model binder is able to bind the username from the query string to the string parameter, and we're getting it returned. Let's check one more thing, right? If we type in the 8 A's, 8, and we do in fact get the bad request response from the server. So I think that that will take care of it for this video. So here again, major focus was to deal with the possibility of having the cross-site request forgery attack. We've done a little bit here in the pushing forward on binding our username that the user is typing into the input field, sending that to the server. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch the video. And if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, whatever, please leave it in the comment section below. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later.